The sun was a bully that day, shoving its hot breath down every street. Sarah felt it baking the back of her neck as she trudged up the walk to Mr. Abernathy's. Sweat plastered her t-shirt to her skin, and each breath felt thick and heavy. She fanned herself with a hand, her face flushed a bright pink. Mr. Abernathy's house was a small, neat bungalow, the lawn meticulously trimmed. It always smelled faintly of roses, a scent she usually found comforting, but today it just felt cloying in the heat. She rang the doorbell, the chime echoing inside. He opened the door, a kind smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. He was older, his hair thinning on top, but he still had a twinkle in his eye. "Well, hello there, Sarah. You look like you've been through the ringer." "I might melt right here on your porch, Mr. Abernathy," she said, exaggerating a dramatic swoon. "Honestly, it's brutal out there." She paused, then added with a casualness she didn't quite feel, "Say, any chance I could use your shower? I'm absolutely disgusting." He chuckled, a warm, familiar sound. "Now, Sarah." But then he looked at her, really looked at her, and the chuckle died in his throat. He saw the sweat-drenched clothes, the flushed cheeks, the way her t-shirt clung, outlining curves that hadn't been there a few years ago. 18. She was 18 now. The realization hit him like a wave of heat, different from the sun's. He hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Before he could form a coherent response, Sarah stepped past him into the cool dimness of his hallway. The hallway was cool and dim, a stark contrast to the oppressive heat outside. Sarah moved further in, a subtle scent of lavender and old books filling her nostrils. It was a familiar smell, a comforting smell, one that always reminded her of her childhood visits to Mr. Abernathy's. "Just for a quick rinse, I promise," she said, turning back to him, her voice a little too bright. "I won't use all the hot water." She gestured vaguely towards the back of the house. "Which way to the bathroom?" Mr. Abernathy stood frozen in the doorway, his expression a mixture of surprise and something else she couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't anger, exactly, but it wasn't the easygoing amusement she was used to seeing on his face. "Sarah," he began, his voice hesitant. I don't know if that's such a good idea." He ran a hand through his thinning hair, a gesture of unease. "I mean, I'm sure you could just go home and—" "Home's too far," she interrupted, her smile unwavering. "And besides," she added, tilting her head slightly, "you always were the best neighbor." She took another step, deeper into the house. "So, bathroom?" She kept her tone light, playful, but there was an underlying steel in her voice, a subtle insistence that he couldn't quite ignore. She knew she was pushing boundaries, testing the waters, but she couldn't quite explain why. A thrill, a dare, a desire to see how far she could go. He sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "Down the hall, second door on the left." Sarah disappeared down the hall, leaving Mr. Abernathy standing alone, the front door still slightly ajar. He closed it slowly, the click echoing in the sudden silence. He felt a knot tightening in his stomach, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years, not since he was a much younger man. He walked into the living room, the familiar surroundings suddenly feeling alien. The worn armchair, the antique clock ticking steadily on the mantelpiece, the framed photos of his late wife, everything seemed to be watching him, judging him. He sank into the armchair, running a hand over his face. What had just happened? How had a simple request for a shower turned into this unsettling feeling? He tried to tell himself it was nothing, just Sarah being Sarah, always a little impulsive, a little dramatic. But he knew it was more than that. He had seen the look in her eyes, a fleeting glimpse of something that made him profoundly uneasy. He got up and walked to the window, peering out at the sunny street. Children were playing hopscotch, their laughter carrying on the breeze. It was a normal summer day, and yet, everything felt off-kilter, as if the world had tilted slightly on its axis. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had just crossed some invisible line, and he wasn't sure he could ever go back. The sound of the shower starting jolted him, a long sigh escaped his lips. The sound of the shower was a constant, hissing presence in the small house. Mr. Abernathy found himself pacing, unable to sit still. He kept replaying the moment Sarah had asked to use his shower, the shift in his perception of her. It had been a gradual change, almost imperceptible, like watching a flower bloom. He had seen her grow up, from a skinny little girl with scraped knees to this young woman. He remembered her coming over to his house after school, asking for help with her homework. He remembered teaching her how to ride her bike, holding on to the back of the seat until she found her balance. He remembered her infectious laughter, her bright eyes, her unwavering trust in him. And now? Now, he felt like he was looking at a stranger. He wasn't sure he understood her anymore. Was this just a harmless favor, a neighborly gesture? Or was there something else going on, something he was missing? He scolded himself for even thinking that way. Sarah was a good kid, a sweet girl. He was just being an old fool, letting his imagination run wild. But the unease lingered, a nagging voice in the back of his mind that refused to be silenced. He glanced towards the hallway, towards the closed bathroom door. The water continued to run, washing away the heat, but also, it seemed, washing away the innocence of their past. Sarah knew he was watching her as she walked down the hallway, even though he was trying not to. She could feel his gaze on her back, a weight that both unnerved and intrigued her. She reached the bathroom, the second door on the left, just as he'd said. It was small and old-fashioned, with floral wallpaper and a clawfoot tub. She closed the door and leaned against it, taking a deep breath. The coolness of the room was a welcome relief. She looked at herself in the mirror, her face flushed, her hair plastered to her forehead. She looked younger than she felt, almost childlike. But she knew she wasn't a child anymore. She turned on the water, adjusting the temperature until it was just right. As the steam filled the room, she began to undress, her movements slow and deliberate. She glanced at the small window above the tub, half covered by a lace curtain. Could he see her? Was he even thinking about her? She stepped into the shower, the hot water cascading over her skin, washing away the sweat and the grime of the day. But it couldn't wash away the feeling of anticipation, the sense that something significant was happening, something that would change everything. She closed her eyes, letting the water run over her face, wondering what Mr. Abernathy was doing, what he was thinking. She had a feeling she knew, and that knowledge both thrilled and frightened her. The image of Sarah as a child flashed in Mr. Abernathy's mind. He saw her, maybe 10 years old, standing on his doorstep, her face streaked with dirt and tears. She had fallen off her bike and scraped her knee, and he was the first person she thought to run to. He remembered carefully cleaning the wound, applying a bandage with a cartoon character on it, and then making her a glass of lemonade. He had always been there for her, a constant presence in her life after her own grandfather passed away. He helped her with her math homework, taught her how to play chess, and even walked her home from school on the days when her parents were working late. He was the reliable, steady figure in her life, the one she could always count on. He recalled countless afternoons spent in his garden, Sarah helping him weed and plant flowers. She had a natural green thumb, and he enjoyed her company, her inquisitive questions, her bright enthusiasm. He felt a paternal affection for her, a sense of protectiveness that had always been purely innocent. He was just an old man, offering a helping hand to a neighbor's child. That's all it had ever been. But now he wondered if he had been fooling himself all along. Was there something more to their relationship, something he had been too blind to see? The sound of the shower continued, a steady reminder of the present, of the young woman who was now in his bathroom, a woman he no longer understood. Mr. Abernathy sank back into his armchair, closing his eyes. He felt a wave of shame wash over him. He shouldn't be thinking these thoughts. He was an old man, and Sarah was practically a child. But he couldn't deny the truth, he was attracted to her. It was a purely physical reaction, he told himself, a biological response to a beautiful young woman. It didn't mean anything. But it did mean something. It meant that their relationship had changed, irrevocably. He couldn't go back to seeing her as just a kid, a neighbor, a friend. He had crossed some invisible line, and he didn't know how to uncross it. He was also terrified of misinterpreting the situation. What if Sarah wasn't trying to seduce him? What if she was just being friendly, being herself, and he was reading too much into it? He didn't want to ruin their friendship, to make her feel uncomfortable or unsafe in his presence. He wrestled with his conscience, torn between his attraction to Sarah and his loyalty to the memory of his wife, his fear of social stigma, and his own moral compass. He was trapped in a battle within himself, a war between desire and duty, between temptation and integrity. The shower continued to run, a constant, relentless reminder of his inner turmoil. Was Sarah truly as naive as she seemed? Or was there a hidden agenda behind her seemingly innocent request? As the water cascaded over her, Sarah considered the power she held, the influence she wielded over Mr. Abernathy. She had known him for years, observed him, learned his weaknesses. She remembered the way he used to look at her when she was younger, a mixture of affection and protectiveness. She had always felt special in his presence, like she was the only person in the world that mattered. But lately, she had noticed a change in his gaze, a flicker of something else, something darker, something that made her both uneasy and excited. She knew he was attracted to her. She could see it in the way his eyes lingered on her, in the way his voice changed when he spoke to her. And she knew that he was struggling with those feelings, battling his conscience, trying to do the right thing. But did she want him to do the right thing? Or did she want him to give in to his desires, to cross the line that separated them? She wasn't sure. Part of her wanted to shock him, to test his limits, to see how far she could push him. Part of her just wanted to be noticed, to be desired, to feel powerful. And part of her was genuinely confused, unsure of her own motives, uncertain of the consequences of her actions. She turned off the water, a chill running down her spine. It was time to face Mr. Abernathy again. The silence after the shower stopped was almost deafening. Mr. Abernathy stood frozen in the living room, his heart pounding in his chest. He imagined Sarah toweling off, her skin glowing, her hair damp and tousled. He tried to banish the images from his mind, but they persisted, vivid and insistent. "This is wrong," he muttered to himself, running a trembling hand through his hair. "This is so wrong." He felt a surge of guilt, not only for his thoughts but also for allowing the situation to escalate this far. He should have put his foot down, told her no, sent her home. But he hadn't, and now he was paying the price. He pictured her opening the bathroom door, stepping out into the hallway, and the thought sent a shiver down his spine. He knew he had to leave, to escape this unbearable tension. But he was rooted to the spot, unable to move, paralyzed by his own conflicting emotions. He closed his eyes, squeezing them shut, trying to block out the images, the sounds, the overwhelming sense of wrongness. But it was no use. The shower had stopped, but the storm inside him was just beginning. He could hear her now, the faint rustle of clothes, the soft padding of bare feet on the floor. She was coming. He had to be ready. But he wasn't. He was far from ready. Another memory surfaced, clearer now, more poignant. Sarah was maybe 7 or 8. A stray dog, a mangy, scared thing, had wandered into their neighborhood. The other children were teasing it, throwing rocks. Sarah, small but fierce, had stepped in front of the dog, shielding it with her own body. He remembered running outside, chasing the other kids away, and taking Sarah and the dog back to his house. He cleaned the dog up, gave it some food, and let it sleep in his garage for the night. Sarah had stayed with the dog, curled up beside it, her small hand resting on its fur. The next day, they found the dog's owner, a tearful old woman who had been searching for her beloved pet for days. The reunion was joyous, filled with hugs and grateful tears. Sarah had been so happy, her face radiant with compassion. He remembered how she had clung to him afterward, her small arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "You're the best, Mr. Abernathy," she had whispered in his ear. "You always take care of everyone." That memory, that innocent display of affection, now felt like a brand on his soul. How could he reconcile that image of pure, childlike goodness with the unsettling feelings he was experiencing now? He had sworn to protect her, to care for her, to be a positive influence in her life. And now, he was struggling with desires that threatened to betray everything he stood for. The weight of his responsibility felt crushing. The bathroom door opened, and Sarah stepped out, a vision of fresh-faced innocence. She had found one of his old t-shirts, a faded blue one with a college logo on it, and it hung loosely on her frame, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. Her hair was damp and pulled back from her face, revealing the delicate curve of her neck. She smiled at him, a bright, guileless smile that made his heart ache. "Thanks so much, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice light and cheerful. "That was exactly what I needed. I feel like a new woman." She seemed completely oblivious to his inner turmoil, to the battle he had been waging within himself. She acted as if nothing had changed, as if this was just another ordinary day, another casual visit to her friendly neighbor. "I hope you didn't mind me borrowing a shirt," she continued, glancing down at the faded blue cotton. "My clothes were a mess. I'll wash it and bring it back tomorrow." He just stared at her, unable to speak, his mind reeling. How could she be so calm, so carefree, when he was teetering on the edge of disaster? Was she truly unaware of the effect she was having on him? Or was this all part of some elaborate game, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to test his limits? He had no idea. He simply didn't know her anymore. As she spoke, she moved closer to him, her bare arm brushing against his. It could have been accidental, a simple lack of awareness of personal space. But the touch lingered for a moment longer than necessary, a subtle pressure that sent a jolt through him. "This shirt is so comfortable," she said, smoothing the fabric over her chest. "It's much better than what I was wearing." "You always had the best clothes, Mr. Abernathy." The comment could be interpreted as a harmless compliment, a nostalgic reminiscence of their past. Or it could be a suggestive remark, a subtle acknowledgement of his physical presence, of his masculinity. She tilted her head, her eyes meeting his. "You know," she said, her voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial whisper, "I always felt safe here, with you. You were always like a second father to me." The comparison could be seen as innocent, a genuine expression of gratitude for his years of support. Or it could be a manipulative tactic, a way of disarming him, of reminding him of his paternal role, while simultaneously hinting at something more. He couldn't tell. He just couldn't tell. Every word, every gesture, every subtle cue was shrouded in ambiguity, leaving him guessing, second-guessing, and spiraling further into confusion. The tension in the room was palpable, a thick, suffocating weight that pressed down on him, threatening to crush him. He had to do something, anything, to break the spell. "So," Mr. Abernathy said abruptly, his voice louder than necessary, "did you see that article about the new community garden down by the park? I was thinking of volunteering. They need help with the weeding." He turned away from her, walking towards the window, putting physical distance between them. The sudden change of subject was jarring, a clumsy attempt to re-establish boundaries, to steer the conversation away from dangerous territory. He could feel Sarah's gaze on his back, a silent question mark hanging in the air. "Weeding," she repeated, her voice flat. "That sounds thrilling." The sarcasm was subtle, but it was there, a hint of disappointment, or perhaps annoyance. He didn't dare turn around to look at her face. "Yes, well," he stammered, "it's important to give back to the community, you know. And it's good exercise. Gets you out in the fresh air." He was babbling now, grasping at straws, desperate to fill the awkward silence. The air in the room had grown thick and heavy, charged with unspoken words and unacknowledged desires. The easy camaraderie they had once shared had vanished, replaced by a palpable tension, a sense of unease that hung between them like a shroud. He had broken the spell, but at what cost? He had created a distance, but it felt more like a chasm, a vast, unbridgeable divide. He knew, with a sinking feeling, that things would never be the same again. Mr. Abernathy finally turned around, steeling himself to meet Sarah's gaze. He expected anger, perhaps, or at least some sign of wounded pride. But her expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed mask that revealed nothing of her true feelings. He thought he saw a flicker of disappointment in her eyes, a fleeting shadow that quickly vanished. Or maybe it was annoyance, a subtle irritation at being rebuffed, at having her advances rejected. He couldn't be sure. She was a master of disguise, a chameleon who could adapt to any situation, any role. "Well," she said, her voice regaining its cheerful tone, "I should probably get going. My mom's expecting me home for dinner." She glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece. "Wow, it's later than I thought." Was she lying? Was she simply trying to salvage the situation, to pretend that nothing had happened? Or was she genuinely ready to leave, to move on to something else, someone else? He couldn't shake the feeling that he had failed some kind of test, that he had made the wrong choice, that he had somehow disappointed her. He watched as she walked towards the door, her movements graceful and fluid, her body radiating a subtle sensuality that he couldn't ignore. He knew he should say something, anything, to ease the tension, to repair the damage. But he was frozen in place, unable to speak, trapped in his own internal prison of guilt and desire. She reached the door, her hand resting on the knob. She turned back to face him, her expression softening, a hint of something almost vulnerable in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Abernathy," she said, her voice sincere. "For everything." Their eyes met, and she held his gaze for a long moment, a lingering connection that seemed to bypass the awkwardness and tension of the past hour. It was a look that spoke volumes, a silent communication that transcended words. Was she thanking him for his kindness over the years? Or was she thanking him for not succumbing to temptation, for upholding his moral code? Or was she thanking him for something else entirely, something he couldn't even begin to comprehend? Then, she smiled, a small, enigmatic smile that sent a shiver down his spine. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "maybe next time will be different." She opened the door and stepped out into the sunlight, leaving Mr. Abernathy standing alone in the dimness of his living room, the weight of her words pressing down on him like a physical burden. What did she mean by that? Was it a promise? A threat? A challenge? He had no idea. All he knew was that the game wasn't over. It was just beginning. The heat outside seemed to intensify, reflecting the burning questions in his mind. The silence in the house was deafening now, broken only by the steady ticking of the clock. Mr. Abernathy closed the door, leaning against it, his body trembling. He felt drained, exhausted, as if he had just run a marathon. He wandered back into the living room, his gaze falling on the armchair where he had spent the past hour wrestling with his demons. It looked innocent enough, a comfortable place to relax and read a book. But now, it was a symbol of his inner turmoil, a reminder of his vulnerability, his weakness. He replayed the events of the afternoon in his mind, scrutinizing every word, every gesture, every subtle cue. Had he imagined it all? Had he read too much into Sarah's actions? Was she truly as innocent as she seemed? He feared that he had lost something precious, something irreplaceable. He had always prided himself on his integrity, his moral compass, his ability to do the right thing. But now, he wasn't so sure. He had glimpsed a darkness within himself, a capacity for desire that he had never acknowledged before. He had lost his innocence, and he wasn't sure he could ever get it back. The weight of that realization was almost unbearable. The afternoon sunlight faded, casting long shadows across the room, mirroring the shadows in his soul. He didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if Sarah would come back, if she would try to cross the line again, if she would simply fade away, leaving him to grapple with his guilt and regret. He was trapped in a state of uncertainty, a limbo between innocence and temptation, between duty and desire. He looked out the window, at the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. The heat of the day lingered, a simmering tension that mirrored the turmoil within him. He knew this wouldn't be the last time he would struggle with these feelings, that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey. He thought back to a few weeks ago. Mrs. Henderson's grandson, a strapping young lad home from college, had been over mowing her lawn. Sarah, in a sundress, had offered him some iced tea. Mr. Abernathy had noticed the way she looked at him, a similar spark in her eyes as she had today. A cold dread settled in his stomach. This wasn't a one-time thing. He closed his eyes, trying to find some peace, some solace, some way to escape the darkness that threatened to consume him. But there was no escape. He was trapped, caught in a web of his own making, a prisoner of his own desires. He was certain he would never look at Sarah, or any young woman, the same way again. The summer stretched out before him, long and hot and uncertain, a season of simmering tension and unspoken desires. The game had changed, and he wasn't sure he knew the rules anymore.